Hi everyone, this is Ronnie, and I want to go through some misconceptions around weight gain and weight loss, or weight maintenance, maybe you could call it, on with the raw vegan diet, raw food diet, fruit-based diet, and all these kind of terms. Now, there's two sides of this that are, for me, kind of incorrect, right? And so it's important to go through this because they've both been promoted a lot. They're two extremes. They're both wrong. They both don't really serve people. One of them's probably far more dangerous than the other, but neither of them really work out as ideas, as philosophies to follow. So, when it comes to maintaining or gaining weight, you cannot gain or maintain weight on a raw food diet or any diet without eating the level of calories that you require to maintain your weight where it is. Regardless of the type of food you eat, it comes down to the amount of calories that you consume. Calories are a measure of the energetic value of food. Calories are the most important nutritional measurement of food. I don't care what people say about um, macronutrients, micronutrients, the amount of water in the food, the amount of fiber. The most important thing, and the reason that our ancestors often ate such poor quality foods like the milk of other animals and the meat of other animals, the reason that they ate those terrible poor quality foods was because calories are more important than anything else. More important than anything else. Now I get some of you are sitting in your fancy house, central heating, supermarket nearby, and you say calories aren't important. But our ancestors didn't have the luxury of thinking like that. They didn't know when the next month's food was coming from sometimes. They didn't know what was happening next year. They didn't know if their crops were going to grow that year. They didn't have the ability to relax about that and think it wasn't important and think, well, I'll get it from somewhere else. Someone else will deal with it. They didn't have that luxury. So they were constantly having to make sure and essentially getting food and having food was the main thing that people were working on most of the time. So that's why people kept animals. That's why people started to farm. That's why we worked very hard processing food and spent a lot of the time of the day processing food for consumption, processing cooked foods that are not designed for us to eat, but we had to process them to make it possible for us to eat. Now people go to the supermarket and go, oh, look at all these foods that we can eat. Once you've boiled them and once they've processed them already for to make them suitable for consumption. They've picked them all out, they've taken off the poisonous parts, they've done so many different processes. Not to the fruit, because the fruit is like food that we're meant to eat, so that's different. But all the beans and the rice and the everything else, these are all processed, highly processed foods. And it's fair enough. Um, Obviously the meat, highly processed, butter, cheese, incredibly highly processed foods. Unnatural processed foods, right? So those foods, regardless of what they are, getting back to the point, um, our ancestors were eating anything that they could get calories out of. It's the most important nutrient. People say sugar's got no nutritional value. It does have nutritional value. It's carbohydrate. It might not have all the other nutrients attached to it, but ultimately, if you only have sugar, if you go to the desert island and you have bags of sugar, you're going to stay alive longer than if you have nothing to eat. Or if you just have leaves to eat. If you're just trying to live on, I'll give you an island with all the kale in the world, all the spinach in the world. But the person on the desert island with bags and bags and bags of sugar and some water to mix it in is going to survive a lot longer. is critical to life. Calories. It's important to understand this concept. Everyone thinks it's not important, particularly important, because it's easy to get enough nowadays. People eat too much. But if we look historically, if we really look at that historically, in the context of it, we see calories exceptionally important. So important that people ate poor quality foods in order to make sure they had enough calories. It was so important. You don't eat enough calories as a child, it can affect your development, affect your growth, affect your IQ. It's very important to get enough calories. So it didn't, back in those days, that was a real situation, real problem. And I would agree, if your situation is you can't get enough calories, which is not the situation of anyone in the modern world apart from in some third world places. But if you're able to watch YouTube, you're probably in a place where you have supermarket down the corner. You've got an abundance of food. You can't complain about not getting enough calories in a raw food diet or anything like that. So you can't maintain your weight without eating enough calories. You can't gain weight without eating more calories than you need. You can do a simple equation to work out how many calories you need. A lot of people don't like this aspect of changing your diet, of adapting to a new diet, because they think it should be very intuitive. Well, it's not. It's not intuitive because you've learned a totally different dietary pattern for decades. Decades. And now you're having to unwind all that. Also, there's addiction involved. You're having to unwind all that. So, it's not that easy. And many people don't eat enough. And many people even know what they need to do, and they know the calorie thing, and they still don't eat enough. And they start to suffer from the symptoms of undereating. They start to suffer from the symptoms. So, but the main thing is you're losing weight. So if you're losing weight uncontrollably all the time and your body mass is going too low, body mass index, then you need to eat more, quite simply. And just to be clear, it doesn't matter how much other nutrients are in the food. It doesn't matter how many greens you eat, how many green juices you have. None of that will matter if you don't get enough calories. None of it. Okay? So none of that matters. Doesn't matter how much antioxidants you get. It won't make up for calories. And you're better off, if you're talking about over the whole of your life, you're better off getting enough calories from less good foods than getting lots of calories, getting not enough calories or inconsistent from supposedly superior foods. And there's a silly thing which is the nutrient density scale or something. A guy called Joel Fuhrman developed it, I think, but it's madness. I mean, some of these vegan doctors, you've got to understand, we respect them, we say, okay, we'll listen to you. But when you're talking madness, we're not going to listen to you. So when they say what's important is nutrient density, nonsense. Because they don't even count calories as a nutrient. So they say nutrient density means all the other nutrients divided by how many calories. And then that number is the answer, right? Because what? A calorie is an anti-nutrient? The calories are the most important nutrient. The most important nutrient. The most critical measurement of the value of food is calories. We literally eat food principally to stay alive, to fuel ourselves with energy. That's what we principally do it for. Yeah, there's other things in it, proteins and all that stuff. Yeah, all that stuff comes along with it. And yes, we need all those things, but those things are in everything. It's not really a big complex thing. Calories. So the idea that what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at all the other nutrients or the levels of random nutrients, divide it by the calories, and then the higher that leftover number with, the better, doesn't make any sense because you're not including the most important nutrient, which is either carbohydrate, fats, or proteins, the caloric part of it. the most important part of the whole equation. So these guys are nuts, right? To say these things. Kale, in their eyes, kale is the best food. The most nutrient dense food. And they completely miss out the whole point. Well, what is the food that you're living on? And they don't want to say, well, it's brown rice or something, or whatever it is there, or bread. They don't want to say that because, they'd rather say kale. Look, it's a leaf, because they want to say raw food. Because actually, that's what they want to say. They don't want to say, oh, well, I live on bread, So, because, anyway. So that nutrient density stuff is silly. Getting your calories is important. Second thing, getting your calories from carbohydrates is most important. Getting most of your calories from carbohydrates is exceptionally important. You can't get rid of that equation either. You don't want to be up and down blood sugar because you've got so much fat in your system all the time. That's no good. That's no good. So you want to have high carbohydrate diet. Now, here's what you can't do. You can't replace any of that. You can't replace one single calorie. Not one single calorie can you replace with energy, with prana, with chi, with emotion, with thoughts, with wishes, dreams, fairy tales, tarot cards, astrology, your past, your traumas, healing, whatever. You cannot replace any calorie. Sunlight doesn't work. Does not work. Never works. Always a failure. And you will find people telling you that they lived for 180 days without food. And then you say, oh, wow, without food. So you just nothing then. And then you speak to them, oh, well, they had juice as well. Oh, they had something else as well. Oh, they had something else. So, and when you meet some of these people, you can tell they've not even eaten any food. They're emaciated. And some of you haven't seen this yet. Some of you haven't met this yet. Some of you haven't come across this. Okay? Maybe you might at some point. And when people say that they've been living on energy and they've got not a single shred of fat left in their body, they've been living on fat. They've been living on their body fat. It's a kind of a strange delusion. I'm not necessarily sure it's always an eating disorder, but it's definitely a bit of a delusion that comes from poor education. That's why we put out these videos, so you don't run into these things. Poor education. Very sad. I blame certain people in this movement for it. I definitely blame people. I'm not going to name anyone right now, and I blame books from the past and things from the past that like to say, we're raw foodists, would say, oh yes, I think it might be possible to live on nothing, or it may be possible to live on light. Like, why are you allowing this bullshit to cloud, a good book that you've written, and then you add this line of nonsense the decades down the line is affecting people and make people try crazy things. So you cannot, none of that stuff works. Breatharian, prana, chi, looking at light, none of that stuff. None of that stuff. Believe me, see all the people online talking about prana, chi, and all that energy stuff. I'm telling you, I've got more experience in all of that than any of these people. Every single one of them. Even including Wim Hof, all this bullshit. Because I've been involved in the martial art called Aikido. And I don't know, started off 13, 14 years ago, right? It's all about, well, a lot of it's about chi, whatever you want to call it. That's what the whole practice is really about, developing chi, developing ki. Met people, been around a lot of people that have been developing this kind of thing, this idea, this concept, for a long period of time. Some people devoted their life to it and all that stuff, essentially. None of them were living on chi. Not a single one. Some of them, they could touch you and you could feel the energy circulate in your face and in your body. Some they could do stuff and move you, move your mind, do all sorts of weird things. None of them were living on it. By the way, some of them died of cancer, heart disease, because their diet wasn't good. It didn't matter how much chi or whatever they had. And then some people say, oh, they didn't know how to circulate, they didn't know how to do this. They knew a lot more than you know. So don't think, like, I can't even describe it or explain it because the things that you see and experience are so strange and unusual, and it's hard to explain it to people, right? And but it ain't replacing food. It's not replacing food. It's a different thing altogether. It's a nice experience. It's a nice feeling. When someone can extend this kind of energy into your body, it's a rare, rare thing. It's very amazing, interesting experience. Very rare. You know, you come across a few people that have these kind of gifts or have developed these things, but none of them were claiming to live on it. None of them were going, do you know what? Since I've been developing this, I don't eat food anymore. Didn't, you know? So when I come across that stuff, I'm like, oh, these people don't even know what they're talking about. But they've never even met anyone who really knows about it. Who really knows about it. Who's, you know. So I just had the advantage of having those experiences. I had the advantage of those experiences. So, you know, when I come across that stuff, I'm like, this is totally not right. Totally not right. So, you just have to look at all the spiritual masters and gurus. Like, a lot of them are fat guys, fat women. Like, none of them are living on energy. And they're all attached to food. It's pretty crazy. They all talk about non-attachment. But anyway, regardless. So there's that side of things. But here's the other side of things. This is a long video, right? In fact, how about we leave this as part one? Leave this as part one. Thank you for watching. Calories are important. You got to eat enough regardless of what you're eating. You can't replace calories with anything else. Not with other nutrients, not with light, not with chi, not with love, nothing. Life isn't about, you know, all we need is love. All we need is prana. No, it's not as simple as that. We need a lot of things. Life's complicated. Learn to embrace that. Okay, thank you.